What if the most advanced technologies in the world weren't coming out of California, or Tokyo, or Berlin? What if they were coming from somewhere you'd never expect, somewhere that, until recently, was known more for its rice fields and war-torn past than cutting-edge science? What if I told you that country is Vietnam? Not a headline, not a fluke. A transformation, quiet, relentless, and now impossible to ignore. Right now, deep inside laboratories you've never heard of, Vietnamese engineers are building machines that don't just compete, they exceed. Electric engines that outperform Tesla's range, autonomous drones that learn in real time, skin-like sensors that can monitor a heartbeat from a battlefield. Not prototypes, not dreams, reality. And in the boardrooms of Washington, in the meeting rooms of DARPA, and behind the closed doors of Silicon Valley, there's a growing question: how did we miss this? Because this isn't about catching up, it's not about globalization. This is about something else entirely. A country once devastated by war has quietly re-engineered itself into a technological force. Not by chance, not by copying, but by building, from the ground up, a system designed to outlast, outthink, and outpace the very nations that once overshadowed it. In the next 60 minutes, you'll see things you weren't meant to see. Inventions no Western media has spotlighted. Decisions made not in Silicon Valley or DC, but in Hanoi, in Da Nang, in research centers nestled between jungle and skyline. And when it's over, you may realize something unsettling. Vietnam isn't preparing for the future, Vietnam is already living in it. There was a time, not long ago, when the world looked at Vietnam through the lens of tragedy. A country torn apart by foreign occupation, civil war, and decades of reconstruction. Its name invoked memories of mud-soaked battlefields, not microprocessors, helicopters, not high-speed trains. For years it was dismissed as a place for cheap labor, not cutting-edge ideas. But while the world wasn't watching, Vietnam was quietly rewriting its story. By the early 2000s, something was shifting. The country that once repaired broken tanks was now assembling smartphones. It started with outsourcing, manufacturing components for Korean and Japanese firms. Then came the software. Young developers, many self-taught, began writing code for global tech giants, quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. Then came the education wave. Between 2010 and 2018, Vietnam increased its investment in science and engineering education by over 300%. While Western schools debated standardized tests and budgets, Vietnam built technical universities from the ground up, imported curricula from MIT and Japan, and trained a new generation of engineers, not to leave, but to build at home. They were the first post-war children to grow up in peace. And they were hungry to create, to lead, and to define themselves not by what came before, but by what could come next. At the heart of this transformation was a name many outside Vietnam have never heard: Nguyen Thanh Mai. Born in a small village in the Mekong Delta, Nguyen spent his early years farming rice in muddy fields with no electricity. He would eventually earn a chemistry PhD in Canada, build a fortune in the imaging industry, and return to Vietnam, not to retire, but to spark a revolution. He started building chemical labs in rural provinces, hiring students from local schools, and training them himself. He believed that the next frontier of science would come, not from those born into privilege, but from those who had learned to make the most from nothing. His story spread, other entrepreneurs followed, and then came the turning point: VinFast. Founded in 2017 by Vietnam's largest conglomerate, VinFast didn't want to be just another EV maker. They wanted to be the first truly global Vietnamese tech brand, and they moved fast, building a $3.5 billion manufacturing complex in just 21 months, launching their first electric car in less than 2 years, and opening R&D centers in Germany, the US, and Australia. They weren't trying to copy Tesla. They were building something Tesla hadn't even imagined. At robotics competitions in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, kids as young as 12 were programming autonomous bots capable of completing complex industrial tasks. High schoolers were winning international AI hackathons. Vietnamese engineers began developing open-source platforms for edge computing, and universities launched quantum computing labs in partnership with South Korean and Finnish firms. But it wasn't just talent. It was motive. In the words of one student from Da Nang, "We're not trying to catch up. We're building the world we want to live in." There were no legacy systems, no aging infrastructure, no bureaucracy to unravel, only forward motion. While the West was busy debating data privacy, regulation, and platform monopolies, Vietnam quietly laid fiber optic cable across the entire country. While Congress debated subsidies, Vietnam opened tax-free industrial zones for hardware startups. While Europe imposed constraints, Vietnam built clean energy R&D cities from scratch, and all the while no one was paying attention. Until now. Innovation isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums in quiet labs under flickering LEDs, behind sealed doors. And by the time the world notices, it's already too late to catch up. Inside a remote agriculture zone in northern Vietnam, a swarm of lightweight drones zigzag above the rice fields, not operated by a pilot, but by artificial intelligence fine-tuned to read crop data, detect pests, and deliver precision pesticide sprays to individual leaves. These drones began as tools for farming. Today, their evolved descendants are undergoing trials for border surveillance and battlefield reconnaissance. No noise, no heat signatures, no human error. Then there's the battery. In 2024, researchers at the Hanoi Institute of Advanced Materials quietly filed a patent for a new EV battery cell. One that could be charged in under 10 minutes and offers 3 times the range of Tesla's most advanced prototype. Its cathode design uses a hybrid graphene-silicon structure, something Western labs had long theorized but never stabilized. Vietnam did. And now they're licensing it to both Japanese and Indian automakers. Meanwhile, in the Mekong Delta, rice fields have become something else entirely, testbeds for AI-powered, fully autonomous agriculture systems. These smart fields are monitored by satellites, drones, and ground-based IoT sensors. They track moisture, nutrient levels, and weather patterns in real time, adjusting irrigation and fertilization without human input. The result? 45% more yield, 60% less water, and almost no manual labor. It's not a pilot program, it's national policy. And then, the breakthrough no one saw coming: bio-nanotech skin sensors. Developed by a startup spun out of Vietnam National University, these sensors are thinner than a sheet of paper, flexible like skin, and capable of reading vital signs with hospital-grade accuracy. They're now used by Vietnamese soldiers in field exercises to monitor heart rate, oxygen saturation, muscle fatigue, and stress levels in real time, wirelessly synced to a mobile dashboard for field medics and commanders. They're also being adapted for hospitals across Asia as a non-invasive diagnostic tool for elderly patients. The US FDA hasn't even reviewed tech this advanced yet. These aren't marginal improvements, these are category-defining inventions. And they didn't come from Silicon Valley, they came from a country the West still struggles to take seriously. This isn't just catching up, it's jumping decades ahead. For years, Vietnam's breakthroughs echoed only within its borders, whispered through academic papers, local conferences, and confidential prototypes. But in 2023, the silence broke. That year, the United Nations released its annual Technology Innovation Index. For the first time, Vietnam wasn't just listed, it was highlighted. Labeled the most disruptive emerging innovator on the planet, it was the kind of report policymakers glance over. But this time, they didn't. Because alongside Vietnam's name were numbers that didn't make sense. More patent filings per capita than France. Faster AI training benchmarks than South Korea. Quantum lab output rivaling mid-tier US universities. From a country still considered developing by most of the world. Suddenly every eye turned east. Japan signed a multi-billion-dollar contract to import next-gen EV batteries from VinFast. Germany partnered with Vietnam's Ministry of Science to adopt its smart logistics platform into its own supply chain systems. The UAE sent a delegation to Hanoi to explore autonomous drone deployments for both agriculture and national security. It wasn't just trade, it was alignment. But what truly shifted the global conversation happened in a sealed room inside a Washington, D.C. intelligence facility. A white paper from Vietnam's premier AI institute, VinAI, had surfaced. This time on quantum encryption. The paper outlined a breakthrough in qubit error correction, a step experts believed was still a decade away for most developing nations. But Vietnam had done it, and they weren't asking for Western validation. They published it, openly, confidently. US defense analysts flagged the report as a strategic concern. One former DARPA official, now speaking anonymously, said, "That's when we realized this isn't imitation anymore. It's innovation, on their terms." Back channels lit up, calls were made, global think tanks scrambled to update white papers, media outlets tried to play catch-up, Vietnamese officials, once politely sidelined at innovation summits, now found themselves at the center of the room. And still, the Vietnamese delegation said little. They weren't interested in catching headlines. They were building a future. And the world was finally starting to notice. For the United States, the rise of Chinese tech dominance had been a slow burn, visible, debated, calculated. But Vietnam's ascent? That was a blind spot. And one Washington wasn't prepared to accept. Almost overnight, policies began shifting. The U.S. Department of Commerce expanded its export control list to include certain AI training chips and quantum research components now banned from being sold to Vietnamese entities. New visa restrictions were introduced, making it harder for Vietnamese researchers to collaborate with American labs. Silicon Valley firms were encouraged to rethink their outsourcing contracts with Southeast Asian partners. Subtle, but undeniable. But Vietnam didn't flinch. Instead of chasing Western validation, it doubled down on sovereignty. A bold talent return program was announced, offering Vietnamese engineers abroad permanent housing, tax exemptions, and research grants to return home and build locale. One researcher from Stanford packed his bags and moved to Ho Chi Minh City. Another left Microsoft's AI division to join a Vietnamese robotics startup in Da Nang. They weren't going back out of nostalgia. They were going home to lead the next era of technology. VinFast, already a major name in EVs, shocked the industry again. But this time, not with a car. They opened advanced AI labs in Germany and Singapore, not Silicon Valley. A message was clear. Vietnam wasn't looking to fit into existing hierarchies. They were building a parallel ecosystem. Then came the whispers. Reports began surfacing of cyber incidents targeting Vietnamese research facilities, nothing confirmed, no smoking gun. But cybersecurity analysts noted patterns, intrusion attempts that mirrored known espionage techniques. The Vietnamese government issued no direct statements. But behind closed doors, systems were hardened, encrypted. Data sovereignty was declared a national strategic asset. For every move made in Washington, there was a counter-move in Hanoi. Not loud, not reactive, strategic, surgical. This was no longer just an economic rivalry, it had become a fight for technological survival. And in this new war, power wasn't measured by missiles or markets, but by code, qubits, and minds. Innovation doesn't begin in labs or boardrooms, it begins in places no one expects. Like a tin-roofed house in Bac Giang province where Thao Nguyen, the daughter of rice farmers, once stayed up late by candlelight, rebuilding discarded radio parts just to hear the evening news. Her school had no computers, no internet, just a rusted chalkboard, an aging teacher, and a girl who refused to stop asking questions. By 16, she'd won a national science award. By 18, she was offered a full-ride scholarship to MIT, and by 22, she was working at one of the most prestigious robotics labs in Silicon Valley. She could have stayed, many do, high pay, comfort, recognition. But Thao came home, not to rest, to build. Today she's the founder of Orion Dynamics, a Hanoi-based startup engineering autonomous medical bots that now operate in over a dozen Southeast Asian hospitals. When asked why she left a promising US career to return to a developing economy, she doesn't blink. Thao Nguyen, VO. I wasn't building for prestige, I was building for purpose. She walks through her lab in Hanoi, surrounded by machines of her own design. Outside, her mother boils rice in the family's rural kitchen, smiling, proud. Their lives couldn't look more different, and yet, they are inseparably connected. Because what drives Vietnam's tech revolution isn't just capital or access or speed, it's memory. It's the lived experience of scarcity, and the decision to never go back. Thao's story is not an exception. It's a new norm in Vietnam. Engineers who come home, coders who care, entrepreneurs who remember the dust and now build in light. The world sees only the product, but behind every Vietnamese innovation is a personal story, and that's what makes it unstoppable. So how did it happen? How did a war-ravaged, once impoverished nation like Vietnam sprint past the most advanced country on Earth in select fields? The answer isn't about raw intelligence, it's about weight. The US isn't falling behind because it's lazy, it's falling behind because it's heavy. Heavy with outdated infrastructure, heavy with bureaucratic red tape, heavy with internal gridlock. Political, institutional, generational. While American schools argue over curriculum, Vietnamese students are building drones by age 14. While US policymakers debate AI ethics in subcommittees, Vietnamese engineers are deploying solutions directly into public infrastructure. The US still leads in raw capital, talent, and legacy, but Vietnam has no legacy to protect, only a future to build, and that has proven to be an advantage. Here's what's different. Vietnam's educational pipeline is centralized, accelerated, and obsessively STEM-focused. Tech parks, government funding, and private firms operate in coordination, not competition. And perhaps most importantly, young Vietnamese developers don't have to unlearn the past. They're building fresh, in code bases, in labs, in cities. In contrast, the US is tied down, universities chained to outdated grant models, tech firms stifled by litigation risk and shareholder appeasement, politicians too divided to formulate any meaningful tech policy. In this race, inertia is the enemy. Vietnam isn't perfect, but it's nimble, agile, hungry, aligned, and in the world of technology, that's not just a difference, that's the difference. What happens when the underdog becomes the alpha? When a nation once defined by its past, by war, by loss, by survival, suddenly begins defining the future for everyone else? What happens when Vietnamese engineers don't just build the next big thing, but decide what the next big thing is? The answers aren't just technical, they're human, political, generational. This isn't just about Vietnam anymore, it's about all of us. Because for decades the world has looked in one direction for innovation, but what if we've been looking the wrong way? What if the next Apple, the next Tesla, the next OpenAI isn't in California, but in Hanoi? Are we ready for that? Are we ready for a future where it's not the West setting the tech agenda, but Vietnam? And are we prepared to admit that catching up might already be too late? This story isn't over, it's barely begun. If you want to know how it ends, if you want to see what happens when a rising nation dares to lead the world, subscribe, because this was only chapter 1, like the video, share it with someone who still thinks Vietnam is decades behind, and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss chapter 2. The future is arriving, just not where you expected.